Did you see that? I was sitting in a hole.
That's no fun.
It's like I
All right, so let's call this work session to order. Are we actually doing, so the diesel emissions and construction sites discussion with, Layla's not going to join us? You're on the, okay.
She'll watch from afar.
And Peter Pastorelli and Steve Adams. Take it away,
Mayor
gentlemen.
Gamba, council members. I'm Peter Pastorelli, the Public Works Director, and I think what we hoped to do tonight was to just have a little bit of a discussion with the council to get an idea of the thoughts on diesel emissions and some guidance on where we wanted to perhaps look into the different programs. Certainly, diesel pollution is a serious problem in the metro area. You know, not only the greenhouse gas pollution, but the particulate matter reduces air quality and causes lots of problems for the region. There was a report, I think, that came out in August from Lewis and Clark College that outlined some potential ways that cities, municipalities can address diesel emissions within their communities. And many of the programs that are currently out there are at the federal level, and the federal government preempts the states and municipalities from setting new emission standards or regulating.
Peter, I'm
standards.
sorry. It's really hard for me to hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you so much. I
So
appreciate
the federal government generally preempts states and local governments from regulating emissions for the most part. There are certainly there's some ways that the cities can regulate those or provide means to reduce emissions. One way is taking a look at what they're doing with their local fleet, and then as well as through contractual obligations that the city might have with contractors that are doing work in the city. Those are a couple of the ways that the city can do that. But there's some other ways that are out there, and I think what we were hoping to find out from the council's where the council would like us to head with this item. I can tell you what we're doing at our local government level currently with our fleet. Right now, we purchase about 10,000 gallons of diesel a year for our fleet. 75% of that volume is used by our Vactor and VACCON. Those are our combination trucks that we use to clean our sewers and stormwater systems. And then also our two street sweepers. They use 75% of that volume. None of those four vehicles currently are convertible to regular gasoline or electric.
And those street sweepers are new. Well, actually,
Those street sweepers are new.
Yeah.
And those sweepers they do meet the latest emission guidelines standards. And one of the Vactor does, but the VACCON does not. We have 10 vehicles and pieces of equipment that are diesel. 6 of them are grandfathered in for emissions. They were purchased in the 90s or prior to 2008, so they don't meet current diesel emission standards. We are in the process of actually planning on replacing those. 2 of them are our 5-ton dump trucks that we have in our CIP for the next biennium to replace. We've got a Dodge pickup that we're replacing this year with a hybrid electric Chrysler Pacifica. It's one of the vehicles that our cross-connection control specialist uses. And then we've got a big 10-ton Volvo dump truck that we use to haul street sweepings and other waste that the city generates from its activities. And then the other 2 big items are, like I said, one is our Vactor truck and the other one is our backhoe. Those are the 6 that don't meet emission standards. One of the other things we're looking at doing is going to start using renewable diesel, R99 fuel. There's some benefits there in terms of improved air quality and reduced carbon intensity as compared to regular diesel fuel. It's about 40 to 50 cents more per gallon. So it's about $5,000 a year that would cost us to do that conversion. Before we do that, we want to reduce how much we empty the tank that we have and get that tank cleaned out so we don't introduce any sorts of contamination or anything like that. I do know right now Eugene, City of Eugene and Eugene Water and Electric are using the R99 and are doing well. I think when I was down at a conference earlier in October, I talked with their fleet manager about the R99 fuel, and they were having good experiences with it.
Peter, is R99 the same as what we used to call B99? Is this biodiesel, or I'm not familiar with this term?
It's a little bit different than biodiesel.
Okay.
It's made from what they say renewable feedstocks. So it's a little bit different than biodiesel. I'm certainly not an expert on it,
Yeah.
but I do know that it's a little bit different there.
Okay. So it sounds like rather than recycled grease, they're using crops for the, but it may be rapeseed or something like that.
Switchgrass and things like
Yeah,
that.
okay. I'll do some research.
So those are some of the things we're doing internally at the fleet level. So we're looking to replace the vehicles that don't currently meet emission standards and looking at using a different sort of fuel source as well. So.
And some of the things we need help directions on, what Peter said is that a lot of our regulations are, all we do are tied by the federal government. California, if you're familiar with them, has a totally different standard because they were a step ahead of the federal government in work and moving forward with the emissions requirements. And so they can operate at a different level than other states can, who did not jump on board before the federal started. And
So explain that, the step ahead. Did they establish standards and then the federal government
came in and tightened them.
had an issue with that? In other words, the oil companies had an issue with that, so they got the federal government to create a preemption to keep other states from
Yeah,
following.
and the Fed level is higher than the California. California's level is lower than the federal level, but since they came in first, they're grandfathered in. Is that correct, Peter? So I remember talking to Natalie about?
Yes.
And other states don't have that luxury. So we have a little more limitations to what we're able to do than, say, what the state of California can.
Well, so I think some of that's in the courts, too, because like California raised its vehicle emission standards, and the federal government is suing on that, I think.
Yeah, but that's the CAFE standard.
Right. I mean, it's different, but I mean, that issue of whether the federal government really can preempt or state, whether that's an area it's appropriate for preemption or whether states can act individually, I think is an issue that will be percolating in the courts out there.
Yeah.
Well, the report suggested that the state could certainly adopt the California EPA-approved emission standards for new on-road vehicles and existing off-road vehicles.
And existing off-road vehicles?
Yes. Yep.
Oh, okay.
But that would be that's what the report suggested, that the state has that option to do that.
I mean, I guess I don't want to cut you off if you were going, but I mean, I don't see us as wanting to set emission standards because then we have to have a way to measure them and all of that. It's, can we set criteria in our contracts, you mentioned that, and our RFPs that we put out there about the number of older vehicles or versus newer vehicles they use. And the real thing is the sitting around and idling. Like, why, when they were doing this time last year, on South Downtown, right next to our lovely new plaza, there was 5, 6 trucks idling at a time on a regular basis. Why do they need to sit and idle? Is there a mechanical reason they need to idle, or is that just drivers who don't want to be cold?
I mean, there is no reason why a truck can't be turned off and turned back on.
Yeah.
And there are idling restrictions in some states and some jurisdictions. The tough thing we have on a capital project, we could require all that you're saying, age of trucks, emission standards on trucks. If we're the only one in the Portland metro area, it could drive up our contract rates, and we want to make sure that council's aware of that. It'd be nice to have all of our neighbors, metro, involved in the same thing so that we're all kind of playing on a level playing field. But if we are more restrictive, we could limit or could raise the price of what contractors will bid for our city projects. Until the state...
Sorry, go ahead.
Until the state adopts stricter standards statewide, I'm told we can't regulate what a private developer does, because that is interfering with their
Contract rights.
But we
Yeah.
could do city contracts for our CIP projects if we choose to. The questions we have is that if we're okay with some extra costs, is do we want to look at the idling times? I think that would be difficult to enforce without having an inspector there with the stopwatch kind of tracking things. Do we want to look at age of vehicles? So we bring in trucks that are more on the higher efficiency side and have better emission controls on them. There's also some state laws out there, city laws, that look at pollution, and the trucks have to go through a DEQ center and have to pass this level of pollutants being emitted out of their stack. So some of the older trucks can be retrofitted to bring down their emissions. But those are the 3 things I have seen in other jurisdictions.
Why are they not already required to pass the EQ standards?
Off-road vehicles, so the construction equipment generally doesn't have to pass.
So you're saying that off-road vehicles could be required? Maybe I'm hearing 2 different things.
Maybe through a contract, contractually, but they don't require, I don't think the off-road vehicles, the construction equipment requires
A DEQ.
DEQ.
Is that what you were talking about, was the off-road vehicles?
I'm saying that in construction vehicles, those are the ways other jurisdictions have limited diesel emissions, is by looking at the...
Specifically, when you say construction vehicles, I mean, dump trucks are construction vehicles, but they are on-road vehicles.
On-road
so they would
vehicles.
have to
We
pass
also
them.
have the excavators and the backhoes that are on site that idle
Right.
and run.
And you're saying that there are some cities or jurisdictions that require those vehicles to pass the EQ standard?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm surprised. Have you done any research on whether or not other jurisdictions in the area are doing any of these things? Because I'd be really surprised if Portland didn't have something in place in its contracting.
Well, we haven't really, I mean, actually, we
Okay.
haven't really dug into that.
Okay.
Into that detail yet, and we're looking for some of that guidance.
That would be, I
the
would love to
only-
see some, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
The only city I'm aware of in the state of Oregon is Ashland. Other than that, that's the only one in my initial search. I haven't spent a lot of time looking at this because we want to get more direction before we dump a
Yeah.
ton of time in it. But there is, I found a federal document that tracked all the states and the cities that were, have passed recent legislation to look at diesel. And the only one in Oregon that came up was Ashland. Current.
And so, I mean, I think it'd be useful to know, to have a kind of, I mean, well, first off, I want to separate the vehicles from the idling times, because I do suspect it's right that you can't control the vehicles a private party uses if they're legal vehicles in the state. You probably can control idling times, though. I think we could have a city policy on idling times
Well, I
at
think
construction.
There's actually a state law on idling.
Yeah,
That's not enforced by
Forced.
anybody.
yeah, yeah. Okay, well, I guess I'd like to know more about that. But then with the other, sort of what is the scale of magnitude of cost increase that we would expect to see if we, impose that?
Okay.
Well, and I guess on that front, one of the questions I would have is, we're a relatively small contract for most of our projects. So my bigger fear, instead of cost, is actually that we would have people choose not to bid if there were requirements that their company couldn't meet with their vehicles. So even if we could just call a couple of the companies that we work with regularly and find out which ones wouldn't have even the sufficient resources to be able to provide that service if we changed it to a requirement here. We've got some people that we really love working with. They've been wonderful over the last year. And I think they'd be pretty open with us about where their fleet is. So if we're going to come back, I'd really like that information as well, because we've had some, at times, difficulties getting bids in, period.
So I would also suggest that you talk to Oregon Environmental Council, because I used to work on clean diesel issues for OEC many years ago, and I just did a quick search on their website that says Cleaner Air and Construction for Portland. December 13th, 2018, Portland adopted Clean Air Construction Standards, a policy that will bring an end to the dirtiest diesel construction equipment on city-funded projects.
Okay.
So I think there is some policy language out there and some experience in the city of Portland around how this impacts their ability to get bids and whatnot. And of course, because we are smaller scale, we are slightly different, but it gives us a good starting point.
Well, it also means that many of them are probably already complying. So it may be a question of whether or not we have issues
Right.
with the compliance today
Yeah.
based on that. But thank you, that's really helpful.
Sure.
So, thinking about the idling time and the issue of, no enforcement, is there I heard complaints from members of the CPAC who were, passing through all that, trying to walk to the max on their commute. Is that something that would be a code enforcement kind of complaint? And would we have a complaint-driven kind of thing? And of course, by the time code enforcement gets there, they've moved on, It's going to be a hard thing to catch. But, it'd be good to know.
Unless our parking guy could be,
Well, to the extent it's downtown, yeah, like if it's Coho or whatever. but-
Well, and our big construction projects this next year won't be. So our big construction projects will be Linwood.
Right.
Linwood, 43rd, 22nd River.
you're
Meek.
talking about our construction projects.
Yeah.
She's talking about private construction.
I'm talking about all idling time.
So we're going to have eventually Coho, we're going to have this one. So downtown
Cool will
is
be the
all-
big one. Yeah, we can look at it. I will tell you that that team will tell us that they're already overburdened for the number of people that they're doing enforcement on, but we can talk to them and have them participate in the report.
So, yeah, a little more research on what Portland did or didn't pass and what effect that may or may not have on our bidding. And then we should put on Karen's list, considering, I think they did at one point. I remember a bill that was supposed to match us to California's diesel standards. I think NOS was carrying it.
Well, they passed a diesel bill last year, and they watered it down entirely. It's
Yeah.
only metro area, and it's a 10-year phase-out
Right.
for metro area, not even for the rest of
Yeah.
the state.
I think there's a good argument to be made against asking Karen to take that on right now, because if we want to prioritize passing legislation about greenhouse gases, those two issues are very easy for opposition to conflate.
Sure.
So
But
I would
on
like
her
to,
to-do list of
sure,
next
yes.
year.
Yes. Once it is politically expedient, we would like to see that occur, yes.
We have a long list for her, actually.
Be sorry she was ever on city council first.
Yeah. She's going to quit taking our calls.
Anything else on this? Did you guys have any more on it?
No.
No, I just wanted to mention, once again, though, that we are, our current fleet, we're working towards replacing
Yeah.
the vehicles that don't meet the standards, and trying to reduce our use of diesel. And as new equipment and vehicles become available that are lower in their carbon intensity. We're looking to replace them with those types of things.
It's awesome.
And that's one of the best things you can do. I mean, generally, the ranking for reducing the impact of diesel pollution is getting rid of those older vehicles, putting pollution controls or using cleaner fuels in the construction equipment, and then you can move to putting particulate filters on vehicles, but that is generally not cost effective. We started using much cleaner burning diesel fuel a number of years ago in the US, and that right there took care of something like 90% of the emissions issues. If you have a vehicle that is new enough to take advantage of the fact that we have this cleaner burning fuel.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thanks.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Annual report from Wes. And is Greg coming?
He is not. Unfortunately, he had an unexpected conflict, so it'll be Shelley and I this evening.
Shelley's going to hang back.
He did call 3 of us to apologize.
Tell him I'm still mad at him then, since he didn't call me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Well,
Chris.
good evening, Mayor, councilors. Thank you for the opportunity to come and share with you this evening, evening-ish. Y'all start your meetings fairly early in the afternoon. Wow, you got a lot of stuff to do.
Yep, I'll probably be here until 11 o'clock tonight.
Well,
No, we won't.
I certainly hope
Okay,
I
Wilma
will
may
be, and I
not.
hope
She may
you
now.
won't as either. My name is Chris Story. I'm the Assistant Director of Water Environment Services. We came and shared with you earlier this year, but we promised to try and make sure we were being transparent and communicating with our city partners, is to provide an annual report to you. So we wanted to come, and we thank you for the opportunity to share today. As we go along, if you have any questions, feel free to just interrupt me right there, and we'll pause, and I'll try to answer any questions you have. With me, as I mentioned earlier, is Shelley Perini, who's our Business and Communications Strategic Manager, and we'll go from there. First of all, just a reminder, and I apologize if I'm boring you, but some people may be watching this that didn't get a chance to watch the previous one, so there'll be some repeat. Water Environment Services, or WES, is your clean water provider. We clean your wastewater and partner with you on surface water issues, and generally work together to make sure that the public health and environmental components of our community are protected. And we also try to ensure that there are sufficient assets to support economic development so people can have jobs and do all the fun things that we like. In addition to Councilor Falconer, who's on our advisory committee. Representative Karen Powers has been on our advisory committee for the last couple of years. She actually just submitted her notice of resignation because of her work at the legislature is just too demanding for her time. So we will be starting a recruitment to, in addition to having a city councilor representative on our advisory committee, having a citizen ratepayer from the city of Milwaukee on our advisory committee as well.
And how do you recruit for that? Do we help you do that, or you just do it directly? Or?
We have a fairly substantial list. With each, actually, we have the Public and Governmental Affairs unit within the county. We connect with them, and they lead the recruitment process, so they have targeted outreach lists that they try and in groups that they connect with. We almost certainly will be connecting with you as well.
Okay.
In addition to the advisory committee, which currently has 16 members and looks to be expanding more as we, as part of our ongoing discussions, are looking at adding a permanent seat for every city council for a city partner that provides wastewater service or receives wastewater service from WES. We are governed by the Board of County Commissioners, and they are the governing body that we report to. As mentioned, public health and the environment is our #1 priority. We support economic development. We try to educate the public about water quality and what we're trying to accomplish, and we try to do all that with the most reasonable rates possible. But we did actually list these in our order of priority. If it comes between having low rates and not protecting the public health, we will choose to protect the public health. And that is our commitment to you as well. Just to make sure that we are all oriented, this is our service area. You will see that you are part of Zone 2A, which is really a way of saying you have a contract for service with us, but are not within our jurisdictional boundaries. The same is for Johnson City, that you can see highlighted a little bit lower there, within Zone 2, which covers the urban unincorporated area for the most part, and the city of Happy Valley, expanding out towards what used to be the area formerly known as Damascus, or the city of Damascus. Zone 1 is wholesale customers on the wastewater side, and Zone 3 is rural, for the most part, surface water services that we provide around the Tualatin River Basin. The city of River Grove is actually served in that area as well, but it's for surface water only, and a piece of that is actually on the far side of Wilsonville.
How did that evolve?
How did the Zone 3 happen?
Yeah.
The short answer was there was a lawsuit against the state for failure to enact and enforce a TMDL around the Tualatin River. And the majority of that burden fell on Washington County and Clean Water Services, but then the, so might say the residual, where the mouth of the Tualatin River is here in Clackamas County, and it was assigned to Clackamas County itself. And in response, they created a service district, the Surface Water Management Agency of Clackamas County, to provide surface water services in that area.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. We did want to flag for you that we have consolidated those 3 service districts into one entity, where we're trying to provide a seamless regional emphasis on surface water and wastewater infrastructure services. As you, I'm sure, well know, water only cares about gravity, not jurisdictional boundaries. So we are trying to align that around watersheds and not political boundaries. And that's part of our commitment to efficiency that we hope to realize with our regionalization efforts. I will also note that probably the biggest outcome has been the predictability. We're able to have our own capital planning. We were able to adopt a capital improvement plan for over the next 5 years that requires $230 million of expenditures. We're well into that at this point. We're spending a little over $35 million a year at this point on construction projects. But we also have been able to realize some savings around our consolidation. I'm happy to report that my finance director came to me about 4 months ago and said that he did not need to refill a position because we just become more efficient. Instead of having 3 budgets, 3 audits, and 7 advisory committees that he was reporting to, we consolidated down to 1, and 1. So we had a vacancy that we just did not fill, and we're able to pass those savings along to our ratepayers. We thought you might like to know what your current rate is and where it's going. The $37.90 is the wholesale rate for sewer service. About 63% of that, a little under 2/3, is just going for current operations. 19 cents of that is the construction at the Tri-City plant that offloaded Kellogg to remedy a, might say, overcapacity issue that it had there in the late 2000s. And then 18 cents is actually being set aside to try and offset future capital construction costs. One of our commitments to our ratepayers is that we will smooth the rates. You're not going to see big spikes where all of a sudden your rate jumps 20% in a single year. So we try to plan ahead, and we take that cash flow from the CIP that we anticipate those expenditures and try to smooth it out so that people have a regular low adjustment to their sewer and waste surface water bills. And leading off the conversation, we thought you might like to hear an update on Kellogg. As you might recall, we are investing a little over $20 million there right now. We had 11 separate projects that were designed to bring the plant back up to its original operating capacity. Over time, and because of the sort of uncertainty around investment, it was, for fear of stranded investment, people just didn't invest. So that is ongoing right now. We're actually pretty pleased at the end results that we're anticipating because this infrastructure lasts for 50 to 100 years, and making sure we get full value is important to us, and it's certainly a lot cheaper to rehab existing facilities than it is to construct something brand new. Along the lines of projects coming down the pike that might be of interest to you, we are looking at revamping our solids handling project at Kellogg. So right now, it's what's called a liquids-based project, which would allow us to add a centrifuge to dewater. Right now, we are hauling quite a bit, between 7 and 9 trucks per day.
That you haul from Kellogg down to Tri-Cities to put in the centrifuge there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then we shift it from being primarily liquid to more of a cake substance, and then we load it into trucks and it actually hauled to Sherman County in Eastern Oregon and applied to farm fields there. Hauling water around for the most part is highly inefficient. As you heard, that's a lot of fuel, that's a lot of trucks. It's a lot of risk. You know, they're going up and down 99E, big tanker trucks. That addition will substantially improve and reduce our truck traffic. It should also improve our cost profile. It's a lot cheaper to run one truck a day than it is multiple. It should also improve odor control because we will be able to install some improvements there and make sure that nothing is getting out. It'll be a completely enclosed process. As part of that enhancement, what we've been able to do down at Tri-City that we're hoping to do the same at Kellogg is improve our cogeneration facilities as well. The digesters generate membrane gas as a byproduct of the digestion process, and currently we strip off a portion of that and feed it into a generator to generate our own power that then offsets what we need to purchase off the grid. We were able to receive a grant from the Energy Trust of Oregon and PGE at the Tri-City facility for nearly $2 million to improve our cogeneration capacity so we can clean and use what in essence becomes natural gas as an alternative power source. We're hoping to do the exact same thing here. On the fund side, I will note part of the grant that we received from PGE included a community engagement component to it. This was Shelley's genius idea, where we actually are engaging Clackamas Community College art students to come down and try to communicate from a visual standpoint the ability of power reuse and reusing natural resources. So who knows? Down the line, we might be having a conversation with you about ideas of an art project you might like to see at the Kellogg plant that might represent the values of your community.
So you're saying like a mural or something? Yeah. There's long been talk of doing murals on the tanks that face the river there, yeah.
Yeah.
I know, I'm the council liaison to the Kellogg Good Neighbor Committee, and I know they would love to be informed of that. So if we could have someone from West come and talk about that at the January meeting, that would really be great.
Absolutely. I have to admit, I'm giving you a preview of coming attractions. We've been notified we're getting the grant, but the grant contract hasn't been officially signed yet. So
you know where to find me,
You're on
Shelley.
the inside loop. But it's
Now, so is everybody in Milwaukee. Or at least the 3.5 people that watch.
yeah.
2 of those are here.
Hi, Joanne. Hi, Bob.
So what's the timeline on the dewatering?
It is currently targeted for fiscal year '22, so about 3 years from now.
Okay.
That's always subject to capacity and availability. Oddly, I think for some public agencies, funding is not our challenge. Our challenge is actually having enough engineers on board to be able to manage these projects and to get contractors to bid on the work to be
We're not
able
the
to
least
do
surprised.
it. Yeah, it's been a real challenge. We've actually had 2 engineering positions posted for over a year, trying to recruit folks, and it's been a struggle. And that has been the bottleneck that we're experiencing in being able to deliver projects. So I'd actually say compliments to our current engineering team, because we are over 3/4 of our projects are well underway with them being significantly understaffed.
Do you know once that
Dewaterer.
gas to power system is put into place, what percentage of the energy use of the plant that will cover?
It depends on what we think we can be able to extract out of the revamped digesters. So part of it is also going to be a refurbishment of the digesters themselves, try to improve their efficiencies, which is usually consists of just completely emptying them and going inside and doing some work, which is not something you do all the time. Our current target at the Tri-City plant is we're getting nearly half of our electricity after the new facilities come online, which is significant for us. We actually we have an energy saving program, and we are committed to looking at renewable energy alternatives. I will digress for a moment because you're bringing up the topic. The county has executed and presented to everybody a climate action plan, and as part of that was an assessment about various components of the county's impact from a greenhouse gas standpoint. And to our surprise and chagrin, our operations were one of the biggest contributors in the county because we are a large industrial facility and consume quite a bit of electricity in creating clean water. So we are actually having conversations right now with PGE to talk about renewable power purchase, which will be a policy discussion that we will have with first our advisory committee and then ultimately the board. And it may mean that we pay a bit more for electricity, but we'll be more confident about not having a negative impact in our environment.
How are we handling fog at the two plants?
Fog is certainly a major concern within the collection system where it builds up and you can get clogging. Once it hits the treatment plant, we treat it as part of the normal weird stuff that shows up at the treatment plant that you just have to deal with. And what typically happens is it just gets sorted out and it's pushed over into the solids handling process and it's cooked as part of the digestion process. Oddly, you may be surprised to know, it doesn't hurt it, and in fact, often will help it. So we are having preliminary conversations actually with Metro around potential additions of fog or food waste to our solids handling capacity, which will both increase the amount of methane we're able to generate at the digesters and can be an opportunity to partner on not sending it to landfills.
For the
Yeah,
three
so-
people listening at home, that's fats, oils, and greases that we're
sorry.
talking about.
Thank you for catching me on that.
Gresham did a pretty extensive program to seek out fog to add to their system, and they've gotten now their plant is saving nearly $1 million a year in electricity, and they are a net zero
Yes.
plant. So they're between the gas to power system, and they have a significant solar array on their plant. They're at net zero, and that's not nothing. $1
Yeah,
million
no,
a year.
it's actually, I've been on a tour of the Gresham plant for that very reason, to see how they were doing it. And the senior supervisor of our Tri-City plant is a former supervisor at the Gresham plant, so
Great.
highly familiar with the issues and challenges that can come from it. One of the challenges they identify, they have 2 generators there at the Gresham plant that they use for methane extraction, and they have to be up and running 94% of the time. So it's high staffing, high use, and one of their biggest challenges is getting the food waste appropriately processed so it doesn't create problems within the digesters and just internally sort of chunking and uneven distribution within the system.
That was my question that I never got to ask in the presentations I was hearing because the venue, but are they causing or having people literally essentially flush those food waste, or is that being delivered into the system in a different manner?
It's delivered to the system in a different manner. They have a processor, and then trucks come and they have a station where they can deliver the food waste and fog.
Okay.
And usually, up until now, it has been distinct. Either you do fog or you do food waste. At a recent conference that our operations senior management attended, it was highlighted that there are some mixes of food waste and fog that could be sort of like an optimal solution, the right mix, because sometimes a little bit too much of one or the other can cause problems. And it was a fascinating paper, so we actually brought that back and are using that as part of our conversations with Metro. The limiting factor I will highlight is capacity. The main way to take advantage of taking additional material and putting it into your system to boost your methane generation and natural gas offsets is having digester capacity to fill up with additional items. And right now, we're building a digester just to get caught up with our current capacity, and that's a $36 million project. Part of our conversations with Metro will include what's it worth it to you to accelerate the construction of our next digester? Because
Right.
that's probably not a burden we want to put solely
Right,
on
we
our
were originally
ratepayers.
talking about 2, and then we said, no, we can get by with 1 for a while, didn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we reduced our cash expenditure now. Now, we did, and we are, in fact, I think I have a slide. The next one, yes. So there it is. There's the project we're constructing. You can see where the tank is going in now, but we pre-constructed the sort of foundational infrastructure for the second tank at the same time. So it would be more efficient and cheaper to put in the second tank, but it will still be a substantial investment. Those are fairly large. That tank is 1.3 million gallons. When we did the liquid testing, we filled it up with water during the summer. It became the largest swimming pool in the state. So we're very proud of that, briefly.
Did anybody take it?
Yeah, you should have had tours.
Yeah, we invited a lot of high schools,
Either.
little high schools out, and dares were issued, but nothing ever happened. I don't know.
So the round ones are the digesters, and the ones on the right are the clarifiers?
Correct.
Okay.
Absolutely correct.
I think
Thank
I
you.
had that backwards in my head.
Yeah, so the tanks themselves, the 2 tanks you can see and the new under construction, it's a little deceptive. They actually go almost as far under the ground as they are above ground. They're total about 55 to 60 feet high.
And just a further note about fog, I'm interested to see how those conversations with Metro go about food waste, because my understanding is that the Gresham plant they actually charge and take in donations. It has become a product. Fog has become a product.
Exactly.
And they are servicing a pretty wide area. So the potential for the Tri-Cities plant to do something similar, I think, is perhaps limited by what has become a market. But food waste, I don't think we have near the limitations there that we might run into with fog.
Indeed, especially with municipalities starting to
Right.
take a more focused look at what food waste and separation requirements, et cetera.
Right.
And that is indeed part of the conversation we want to have. We recognize with the fog, in many ways, vendors are being paid to go out and clean because we, as part of our pretreatment or connection requirements, require high fog, fats, oils, and grease contributors, particularly restaurants, which are the sort of the main ways that gets contributed, to have grease traps or other items to make sure it doesn't get into the sewer lines, because as you know, that just clogs them up and then can cause a backup issue, and people get very unhappy about the smell of their basement. But because those vendors are cleaning it out, there is a finite amount of it. I don't know what the reach would be. The Metro's proposed vision is to have some sort of fog site, Gresham for the east, somewhere in Washington County for the west, and then Clackamas County for the south, that sort of aligns with their transfer station model
Yeah.
of folks. And food waste is certainly part of that conversation as well. But again, it really comes down to capacity and the infrastructure to handle it. And we're at a very preliminary stage, but we are certainly interested in having the conversation.
That's great.
Off the top of your head, do you happen to know the electric bill for either of those plants? Either ours or?
Tri-Cities bill is around $900,000 a year, and that's after, not counting, you might say, the savings that we're experiencing because we generate our own electricity. Kellogg is around $750,000 a year in electrical bills. And we also have a separate energy saving program where, we have a program that our staff will go through and try to identify ways where we can just use less electricity, not just generate our own. And that has led us to save over 1 million kilowatts, and that has estimated we're around 150,000 in savings there as well. And to transfer back to the presentation, but indeed, these are fascinating questions. Thank you. Please keep them coming.
Sure.
The project at the Tri-City plant continues. We are more than halfway done with construction of the solids handling. This picture is from earlier this summer. We're actually now at the point where it has a roof and has not only been tested for liquids but gas. We're putting in the internal infrastructure, and there's a building being constructed. You can see just to the right of it that will contain a fair amount of piping. It will contain the cogeneration facility and a new loading facility where we can load the trucks after the solids run through the centrifuge, and it'll reduce our manpower. It'll be an auto loader that will shift things, so we won't have to have staff out there manning it all the time.
Is the centrifuge in that box in the middle?
It will be. It's currently in the gray building there in between the two. And we're sort of reorienting it and shifting so the trucks will load there along that arc at the very bottom. And then we actually installed a scale a little bit further along the track so we can have our loadout right there to make sure that we're legal, and frankly, we're also trying to optimize. We load them as much as possible to minimize the number of truck trips, and we typically are around 32 tons per trip, and we take one trip a day on average. So that's the volume of materials that we're talking about, 32 tons a day, shipping out 7 days a week. Quite a fascinating and oddly silent but necessary service. That's why we're here, trying to share about it. We get all geeked out and excited about it, but most people have no idea.
I want to know.
That's right. And they're like, I don't want to know.
I know that it
Does
works.
I don't
the
have to
toilet
think about
flush?
it
It's
after
not my
that.
problem. And we're very respectful of that. The part that they may care about is where can I walk, which is the question we get around this project. This is the bridge that connects across from Gladstone to Oregon City. The pipelines that actually pull wastewater off from this area up here, the pump station is right by the Lowe's and CarMax location. So right towards the edge of your city, and then diverts it down to Oregon City for treatment. We currently have a 10-inch and a 20-inch force main because we have to pump it by force. It doesn't go by gravity. There's a ridge in the way. We are adding a 30-inch line that will go across this, and as part of our review of the bridge, we realized that it was seismically unstable and unlikely to be able to support the weight of all that if there was an earthquake. So we are renovating the bridge, and we are reinforcing its seismic support so that even in the event of a large earthquake, a significant earthquake, it will continue to hold those pipes effectively and not spill any sewage into the rivers. And it's actually being sized to handle up to a 9.0 earthquake.
Wow.
So it is also being slightly widened and configured such that it can handle emergency vehicles in the event of a disaster, because after this upgrade is complete, it will be the most seismically stable bridge across the Clackamas River.
Kidding.
So
Even including the one at Carver? I thought that was pretty new.
the Carver one is pretty new, and it is rated slightly less
Really?
than this one. And it's certainly superior to both the 99E and 205 bridge.
Oh, yeah, 99E one is.
Yeah, we're presuming that if there is a big one, this is where the 99E traffic is going to get diverted
Yep.
to. So we're actually pleased. We've been having some conversations with neighboring jurisdictions, utilities around resiliency and having a coordinated response. West staff is part of Clackamas County's disaster management plan. One of the first responsibilities that will come up if there is an earthquake, although as our disaster manager likes to report, the number one problems we have are fires and floods. So FYI. But in the case of an earthquake, our engineering staff would join in reviewing bridges, which are sort of the weak points for such a water-rich region as ours. And our staff would join with the road crew in the number one priority, which is clearing roads so that supplies can get in to support people, particularly hospitals and or shelters where folks are. So we are going to get the sewer system back up and running, but I actually just going to flag from a resiliency standpoint, there are other priorities that are a bit beyond your typical, I'd say, missional organization, but we try to plug in to make sure that as a region we'll be able to respond effectively to disasters.
When is that project supposed to be done?
This should be done later in about midpoint 2020. It's on schedule. It should open then. Oh, look, I got ahead of myself talking about climate resiliency. Those are probably familiar photos to you from the '96 flood. Both of our treatment plants were underwater, and at a certain point, we're not providing any treatment whatsoever, right? I mean, the river was the treatment. And what we have done actually is there is a tool the EPA has that is the climate resiliency evaluation and awareness tool, CREATE, that you can utilize. They will actually pay for consultants to come in and evaluate your infrastructure from a resiliency standpoint, from both a natural disaster standpoint and climate impact for adjustments for long-term, 100-year profiles of what the impacts of climate change might be. And then we're able to build in basically margins within current CIP projects of how much they should be upgraded to be able to handle anticipated changes. So we went through that process. It was really fascinating. And one of the challenges we had was they said, this is the amazing tool. Here's all the information. Now pick your baseline factors. How bad do you think things are going to be? And we're like, we thought that was your job to tell us how bad things were going to be. They didn't want to take a position on it, so we just ran some scenarios and looked at variables that could sort of articulate the range of possibilities and impacts that we would have to face. And then
How far out were they looking?
the model went out as far as 100 years. And we actually use that in some circumstances because some of our infrastructure will last 100 years. Most of our modeling was around 50 years because the majority of our assets, particularly I'd say the concrete and whatnot, those are 50-year assets, and that's the way we, it's weird. We have a 5-year capital plan, a 20-year planning horizon, but we have 50-year assets. So we're trying to capture that, and our current planning actually goes out to 2080 with our long-range planning. But that is, I think it's been a valuable exercise and helped us identify, much like the 82nd Street Bridge, where we can add just a few dollars more to really try to ensure that whatever investment we're making now will be able to stand the test of time against changing circumstances.
So in the models you were running, did it talk about frequency and intensity, and how did those compare to 96?
It did. Well, the struggle was you could put in your variables, and because
Was it a
climate
second election of Trump in the variable?
it wasn't. That was not a variable, interestingly enough. But climate is highly dependent upon initial conditions. So we actually put in a range of baselines and ran models on scenarios that went out, and we basically created a band of likelihood, and then tried to test what the dollar value would be for projects versus, you might say, the return or likelihood of something happening. And there we were kind of running into our best guess based on available literature, what the likelihoods are, and then, try to build that into our CIP modeling about how much we're going to be spending on stuff.
And given that this is a tidal river, did any of those models take into account sea level rise?
Yes, we went at sea level rise. It also modeled rainfall patterns, where you might see storm surges, drier summers, wetter winters. So actually, probably the biggest impact was not from flooding, but from I&I peak flow factors were probably our biggest challenge from a resiliency standpoint. And how do you upgrade your conveyance system to the point where it's able to handle harder surcharges coming in shorter periods of time, something that you see more in the Midwest and in the East Coast where you have concentrated rainfalls. I mean, I lived in Washington, D.C. and New York for a little while, and they got the same amount of rainfall as Oregon, but it's a entirely different kind of rainfall pattern.
More monsoon-like.
Yeah, it just shows up and pours on you every so often.
Aren't we working towards reducing our I&I anyway?
We are. And in fact, that is the next big project. And boy, I'm just kind of telegraphing my punches. That will be a topic a little bit later in the slide. And I will definitely share on that as well. I did want to flag for you that we have a Good Neighbor Committee. Thank you for your service on that. That is part of an outgrowth of our IGA that sets forth our service to you. We have partnered in the past on several projects, not just landscaping and screening and some odor control improvements, but we actually have a portion of that fund being used to finance a borrowing that was used to match a grant that you received to improve Milwaukee Bay Park. I did want to flag, while with that as a background, that we have signed recently a Good Neighbor agreement with Oregon City and Gladstone. They were quite enamored with the deal you got and asked for something, but theirs is a little bit different. The scope of it is geographically broader. Right now, the Good Neighbor Agreement with the City of Milwaukee basically limits it to a fairly narrow band around the treatment plant. And their point, which was well taken, is this is a community impact and we should look for things that are a little bit broader than just within a few hundred feet of the treatment works. And so we ended up with a geographic boundary in Oregon City and Gladstone that actually ranges out a bit over a mile in various areas, basically designed around the zones of the cities that are in theory experiencing an impact and or would be a good place to partner on water quality projects. So you see several parks were included in that, including Clackamat Park and Meldrum Bar. So we wanted to note, if there is interest, we are happy to have the conversation of perhaps reconfiguring the manner in which your Good Neighbor Agreement works. We think that's something your staff has flagged as would be of interest. Another component to the Good Neighbor process in the Oregon City Gladstone circumstance that's a bit different from yours is that rather than having a separate committee that is narrowed to the two neighborhoods that are immediately adjacent to the park, because you saw this broader geographic area, it just referred the matter to the city councils. The Oregon City and Gladstone City Councils receive basically an annual contribution, and then it is up to them to engage in whatever public process they feel is appropriate around the expenditure of those funds. So you don't have to have a separate committee that governs it. It's more a recognition that impacts to the community should be decided by the elected leaders of that community.
What do you think about that idea?
I will say that I have been a part of some preliminary conversations with Greg Geist about this, and we'll talk more about it.
And that seems to be often running in preliminary conversations around projects. There are shared enhancements of some trails. There's some creeks, and the cove itself has some, you might say, residual leftovers from some previous industrial activity that could be remediated, signage, educational opportunities, lots of stuff to do there. We are not your surface water provider. However, we are co-permittees with the City of Milwaukee. We all share a single permit because DEQ, when they were trying to figure out how to handle the metro area, said, City of Portland, you are covering the City of Portland, and Clackamas County, you look an awful lot like Portland. You're just one big urban area. So rather than having 11 different permits for smaller cities, which would drop the expectations of water quality down, they issued one permit as if we were one big city, but they put all of us on the same permit at the same time and said, and now go work together. Which has not been the most effective way of doing things, but I certainly understand the goal that they were trying to accomplish by that. So everyone kind of has their own surface water programs, but we try to partner and coordinate where opportunities arise, in particular because, again, water is no respecter of jurisdictional boundaries, so we are often doing work upstream of you, and the project you see there on the screen is our Carly Creek project, which is in the Clackamas industrial area. It is a 15-acre site that was previously a farm field that we purchased and then converted into a wetland that then we rerouted Carly Creek, which was piped and sort of just heading straight into the Clackamas River to this area. The creek itself originally ran right along the edge of the property, and we restored it so it had a more natural channel. We put in some woody debris. You can see examples of that down there to try and slow the velocity of the creek so you get less erosion, more sort of pools that will be calm and you'll be a bit colder. And it came online in fall of last year, and 3 days later is when there was a fire at the bakery with the propane got dumped, and it all dumped right into the storm drain and started rushing towards the river, and we were actually able to go out there and divert it so it hit here, and then we put out some materials that absorbed it, and while we notified the drinking water providers, we're pretty confident that we were able to capture it here and keep it from hitting the river. Now, that's especially important to you because you're part of a regional system, and the regional system, the majority of people, although I think not you, get their drinking water from the Clackamas about a quarter mile downriver from this site. So we all can play a role helping each other and protecting water quality. I use this as an example to give you a heads up about what's coming next, a project we're very excited about, which is Three Creeks, the Harmony area. Wes owns this site. It was eventually turned over to us after the Park District was originally the owner of it, with the vision of having ball fields there, but it flooded, and there was some environmental contamination there, and so they decided that wasn't the great way to go. And then it just got turned over to us, and we were unsure what to do with it, but now we're seeing a vision and an opportunity there. So we have engaged some consultants, and we're starting a design process with community engagement to talk about what enhancements we can make on this site. We call it the Three Creeks because there are indeed three creeks there. We're looking at some wetland restoration, water mitigation, natural habitat restoration. We partner with the Tsunami Crew and Solve to do some cleanup and work there on a regular basis anyway, but we think this is going to be a substantial project. We were able, and I'm sorry if I'm boring you, but I'm all excited about this stuff. We were able to actually use the solids handling project as a financing tool for this through the state revolving fund, Clean Water Act state revolving fund process. If you get money through that, they have what's called a designated project opportunity where instead of we borrow at market rate, say 4%, but if we agree to go out and do a project that will enhance water quality, they lower our interest rate to 1%, and the difference that we would have paid in interest becomes the money that's available to use for the water quality enhancement project. So by borrowing the money for the solids handling project, we created, in essence, $1.6 million that we plan on spending here. And that's been such a successful opportunity, and frankly, our surface water program manager, Ron Merga, has said, I could spend a lot more. We're looking at using the SRF for some other infrastructure projects as well to see if we can try to continue to increase the amount of funding available to make these sorts of water quality enhancing projects. So we're very excited about that. That is coming soon, and we look forward to your engagement and participation about what happens there.
Okay, so that was my question. You don't have an actual plan yet. You're just starting on the, okay.
Yes, so yeah, we did an RFP. We hired a consultant that will do some, lay out some, well, they'll do some investigation to confirm, and we have a lot of historical data, and we go out there every so often, but we haven't done a thorough review. But then we'll be bringing back some options, and then there'll be some community engagement around possibilities that we
So
might
when
do.
you say flood control facility, it's not just about improving water quality, but it's actually about slowing down how things go down Mount Scott Creek to the juncture with Kellogg?
Yeah, and actually, that flood control facility, as you might say, is a inheritance that Wes received. The development agency, the Clackamas County Development Agency, constructed that to try and free up some space downstream for industrial development. So there's a facility there now that creates basically a wide spot, and there's a gate that's fixed, so it backs it up, and then at a certain point it just goes through. The challenge is it still floods downstream of that on a fairly regular basis, and based on our CREATE modeling, we expect that to get a little bit worse. So part of this project is to look at what we can do to try and mitigate that. The odd thing is Wes is not a flood control organization. We're a water quality organization, but we think this is a value that we can add to our ratepayers, and if there's overlap, we want to try and solve the problem.
And there's going to be overlap.
And
more
there's going to be
in the
overlap.
next-
Yeah, because part of this could include, creating effective wetlands, putting in the, natural vegetation, and then allowing it to back up much more significantly than it does now to, in the winter, you could have a a temporary lake show up down there. It's a fairly large site. It's a little over 100 acres.
Yeah.
It's one of the largest natural areas left in, the urban boundaries
One
of
of the
Clackamas
biggest
County.
stands of native
Of
white oak,
oak.
too.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah,
area.
it's beautiful down there.
Yeah, I
I
was,
spent a lot of time there.
Yeah.
If you haven't had the Steve Berliner tour, I highly recommend going down there with him sometime.
Yeah, I've only been down with Solve. We take some school groups down there, but I haven't gotten the full guided tour.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
tsunami guys,
Go with Steve.
either
Yeah.
Berliner or
Renyard.
Renyard.
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, some of us did, about 4 years ago, did this oak tree inventory project, and I went down there with another guy, and we had a huge tape measure, and we measured the oaks, and we did like geo mapping of where they were and how big the diameter was and all this stuff. Yeah, it was great.
It's fantastic. We're actually, again, extremely lucky to have Shelley partnering with us and on board because she, in one of her previous roles, worked with Clackamas Community College, who's one of the, strong presences on that Harmony area. And I have some connections with NCPRD, so we're hoping we can wrap them into the larger conversation as well and maybe get some synergies between the various groups.
And I would just add, because Boulder was such an influential force at that time, so we want to make sure that all the work, Will, that we did around the Harmony Community Campus for, what was it, almost a decade in total, is carried through into this process and on.
Yeah, well, and one of the things that happened there, the only time I've been way down in Three Creeks, is that my leadership class in 1999 planted, all kinds of vegetation down there, and we built the bat houses, and we built some of the bird houses, bird feeders, and stuff like that. And it was wet. In fact, I was actually talking about that incident earlier today when we were talking about floodplains and how things do flood and whatever. And so that would have been like in April, I think, maybe May. And we wore hip waders and knee boots and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it was a pretty interesting day down there.
Yes, it can definitely get exciting. And one of our other exciting elements, I'll just note, and challenges that'll be part of the planning process is we have a fairly regularly recurring homeless presence in that area. And part of our projects as we go down there is clean stuff out before the wet season so that when the banks rise, you don't get trash in the streams.
Well, and I was going to say, in that regard, I do think you already have somewhat of a partnership with NCPRD because they do a September cleanup every year, and the last 2 years, it's always included a site at Three Creeks.
Yep. Tanya is great. We actually work with their crews, Kevin and Tanya, to go down and do work on a fairly regular basis, not just at the end of the summer. But that's our big push. Yep. I do want to flag that as part of our surface water program, we partner not only with your city staff, but also several nonprofits and other providers throughout the area to try and ensure that our water quality overall is protected. I just wanted to make sure they got that shout out. I did want to flag a couple upcoming
Wait,
items.
before you go on, can we go back to that? So I'm the council's, actually, I don't see it up there, but
I don't either. That's what I was looking for.
one that you have missing from there is the North Clackamas Watersheds Council. And I'm the council's liaison to that. And you guys have a liaison who used to work for the city, Rob.
Hungerford.
Yeah.
No.
No.
Livingston.
Livingston,
Sorry.
yeah. He's your liaison to that. So this year, you guys always do these grants for streamside or sort of
Yes.
restoration projects. And I understand that this year you actually kind of maybe gave a couple grants in our industrial area to Dave's Killer Bread maybe, or somebody.
I am recalling something like that, yeah.
So I just wanted, I wanted to applaud you for that, because, that's, I do think, like you said, water, we have Minthorn Creek running through that industrial area along International Way, and it really is in need of some help. And there's lots of opportunities there because it is daylighted. I mean, it's daylighted most of the way, and so there are definitely some opportunities for streamside restoration to bring the temperatures down and all of that. And so to the extent we can I think the Watershed Council, the city, and Wes, I think there's a potential, some projects there that we could maybe work on together, so.
That would be fantastic. Yeah, those are our river health grants.
Yeah.
We budget $300,000 a year, and we try to break them up into approximately $15,000 grants to multiple groups because they're sort of premised on the idea of community action where people will gather together, groups or volunteers, and we're basically providing the supplies and a sort of backbone that they need to convert their labor to be the most effective possible. Will open in January. Our grant application process will open up, so it's coming up fairly soon, so you'll probably see some advertisements, and we would love to partner with the city on that. And we will add that logo to the screen. I'm sure Shelley already made a note. I did want to flag for you that we have been undergoing a sort of serious look at our rules and regulations. WES was, CCSD1 was formed in the 70s, Tri-City was formed in 1980, and the rules that govern both surface water and wastewater standards for the most part have been not really touched for 25 years. Now that the sort of entities have been consolidated, we're trying to revamp them to best practices, in particular an emphasis on green infrastructure and having the flexibility to make sure that people, if they want to experiment, they can experiment in ways that try to improve water quality. One of the biggest complaints we get from folks is we have, for example, infiltration standards that make sense in one portion of our district but not in another because the soil is, full of clay. Those sorts of things. So we're trying to look at what is, in the best interests of effective water quality rather than just having lockstep rules. We also got feedback that some of the charges that we had were out of line with what other folks were charging across the region, in particular around warehouses and some commercial development. Our SDCs were higher than other folks. So we did a look at that and went to our advisory committee for a couple different conversations, and they agreed with some changes that will actually lower SDCs for certain commercial activities and raise them from others, and overall there will be a net balance. Coming up this week and next, we're having open house forums to allow folks to come and see the rules, share their perspective. We'll have tables set up, we'll have staff there. We're also going to have, which is unusual, but we want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to comment, a online open public comment period, similar to the way the state regulatory agencies do it, where you publish the materials and then folks can just submit written comments to us over 30 days so they have a chance to digest things and then give us the feedback. We'll then be bringing back the total package to the West Advisory Committee for their final sort of review and chewing on it, and then ultimately a recommendation will come from that group to the Board of County Commissioners, and we're hoping to have the revamped rules up and running by the next fiscal year. One hot topic that our advisory committee has been talking about as part of this project we thought might be of interest to you, which is the manner in which we assign equivalent dwelling units. And I remembered not to use the acronym this time, EDUs. Our current rules, again, more than 25 years old, basically say a house is a house is a house. And there was not a real distinction around that. We've heard several people express concern that that was not an accurate representation. So we actually launched into an internal review, and blessedly we have this genius employee, Erin Blue, who she is a genius at slicing and dicing data, and she went back and pulled census data, water consumption data. She actually got water consumption data from Clackamas River Water and from Sunrise Water Authority, and then combined it together to make their system sort of and data sets reconcile, and then compared it against census data and compared it against some assessor's records. We were able to pull around the size of houses from the county assessor and create basically a model that showed whether or not there was an impact from dwelling size versus the amount of water that they would consume, which we used as a proxy for amount of they are contributing to the wastewater system. And the short answer was there was. there was a curve, and smaller homes on average were consuming less water, and larger homes on average were consuming more water. It got kind of wonky at the very end where you got really large houses because the water consumption, we tried to use winter water consumption rates because those are less likely to reflect irrigation or other things like that.
Swimming pools.
But you still saw real weird spikes at the very top end. We're presuming those are like water features, fountains, other things like that we didn't have confidence, and frankly, the numbers were so small that it didn't make a big difference. So we cut it several different ways. We presented a couple different options to our advisory committee, and over the last several months, they've been debating this, and at our last meeting, they gave us direction that this was something that they preferred exploring with the public, a 5-option approach to EDU assignment, where you look at basically categories broken out by square footage, where the average home between 1,800 and just under 3,000 square feet is considered basically a 1, and then you go standard deviations out from that. If your home is smaller than that, you pay less of an SDC. If your house is bigger than that, you pay more of an SDC. We then ran that model against our records for existing development and said, if we had followed that model over the last 10 years, what would that have done to our revenue? And the answer was, out of $9 million of SDC revenue, they were about $50,000 different. It didn't really make a difference at all, because the driver for this is population. And that's what we use for our projections for future capacity. We don't look at the size of homes, we look at the number of people showing up, because the amount of capacity we need to provide at the treatment plant is really based on the amount of contributions you receive from an individual in various forms and fashions. That is the most polite way I can think of saying it, Justin. By the way, that includes like washing dishes and taking showers and other stuff that goes down the drain, but there is the fun stuff as well. So we think actually this is while it may have impacts, and I want to sort of share this with you, our perspective is that this is likely to have impacts that supports affordable housing, but we did it because we want to make sure that we were accurately representing the impacts these homes were having on the wastewater system. And we have a data set that validates that these distinctions are reasonable and appropriate from a policy standpoint, because we're also mindful that while there are larger benefits, goods that can be accomplished, our goal is to make sure that we are good stewards of the dollars from ratepayers around water quality for wastewater, and the data supports that smaller homes have less of an impact, so they should pay less at the time of development.
So has your advisory committee already voted to support this, or this is still?
So what they did is they said, we like this approach, go propose it to the public. So this will be what's shared at our 2 open houses and be posted to the public as part of our 30-day comment period. Then it'll come back and we'll see what other people think of it. And if you all have a perspective that you would like to share, we would welcome your views on that. And then it'll be part of the final proposal. What comes out of that discussion will be part of the final discussion with the West Advisory Committee.
So that's lumped together with the rules that you're working on?
Yes,
Okay.
this is part of our rule update.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I think it's something the mayor's been asking for years.
It's certainly an improvement.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's all getting there.
yeah.
Yeah. Interestingly, we, much like the large homes, the data starts dropping off on small homes, because there isn't that many
There were
to
3,
use as
I
a
remember,
data
on the
set.
little bitty homes.
And at a certain point, it is just the amount of water one person uses. And whether you're in a 300 square foot or an 800 square foot, if it's a single occupancy, it tends to be around the same. So there's a flattening out at a certain point where, it's not a linear progression all the way through, which was fascinating. I did want to flag that.
Oh, my God, that's the inside of a pipe.
That is the inside of a pipe while it's raining.
That looks like a ride at Disneyland to me, but okay.
It looks like you just went through.
My water. Sure.
I think you just went through Monstro's mouth.
Yeah, Yeah, exactly.
There you go.
Some bad cave, water
Off
ride.
you go. So part of the overall challenge that we face is every drop of water that shows up at the treatment plant, we treat. Because you never know. There might be something in there, so we treat it to the maximum extent practicable to make sure that it's clean water going out to the Willamette River where we discharge. Part of the problem is, of course, during those peak wet weathers, we're treating rainwater for the most part, which is hideously inefficient. And the electricity I was talking about spending, the majority of that is because during the winter, we have a very significant peaking factor. Both Kellogg and Tri-City run between 7 and 9 million gallons a day during the summer. Kellogg peaks at 25 million in the winter, but that's because we divert the flows away because it doesn't have the hydraulic capacity to handle much more than that. Tri-City peaks at around 60 million gallons. So we are seeing an 8-fold increase in water that shows up, and that's groundwater and rainwater getting into the system.
So are you not diverting to Tri-Cities in the summer then? Everything that
We do.
can come to Kellogg comes to Kellogg? Or no, you're still
We do.
diverting?
We still divert. We pull off, there's 2 stripping points down in the industrial area. We pull some flow that goes down to the Tri-City plant and then the pump station there by Lowe's. We maintain at least 2 million gallons is flowing during the summer.
Oh, okay.
And that helps us. The membrane bioreactor treatment train at the Tri-City plant is our more electric intensive, but also far higher water quality producing treatment train. So we make sure that there's sufficient flow to utilize that all throughout the year.
So have you guys done a concerted effort to get downspouts disconnected from the sanitary sewer system?
We have actually done a study of where all this water is coming from. And one of the things we wanted to share with you is this is not a individual problem. It's not a one area problem, it's a regional problem. Every city that we serve, with the exception of Johnson City, and they were quite proud of that, has some degree of an I&I challenge that they're working on. Because trees really like pipes. It's chock full of nutrients and they like to grow into them. People, older homes, and many of our well-established cities, that's still a challenge, have those connections. Cross connections can be, even with new construction, made where it's just an accident. We recently had one of those where a newly constructed restaurant accidentally cross-connected their storm system into the sewer system, and they were just pumping rainwater right into the sewer line for a couple months before we found it as part of an inspection. Because we actually go out and, like you, TV all of our lines on a fairly regular basis. That arrow indicates that the basin, that we're not saying your whole city is having an eye problem, we're saying we identified pipe sheds. We had 42 different pipe sheds, much like watersheds, throughout the system, and we connect with you on just a few points because you have your own collection system. And we are seeing a peaking factor above what we would prefer to see at those connection points. In our own interceptor up in Happy Valley, coming from the industrial area, Gladstone, Oregon City, Westland, everyone is experiencing this because water finds a way. Water just finds a way. So we did an analysis that looked at what is the optimal way to handle it, because while we can't just build more capacity, and it can be really expensive to pull up pipes. I'll wrap up soon. We tried to figure out.
7 minutes, you're good.
Okay. The most cost-effective way to address this problem is not to build more capacity to treat all this rainwater, but to try and go all the way up to the laterals to the homes and make sure that downspouts are not disconnected, that laterals haven't, degraded to the point where they're picking up a whole lot of groundwater, pushing into it. As an industry standard, even if you're able to go that far, you will accomplish about a 65% reduction in I&I. There's just a certain amount of it that's inevitable, particularly in a wet environment that we have here in our winters. like I said, water finds a way. So that will include partnering with all of our jurisdictions with smoke testing, which can be really exciting. You got to warn people, don't call the fire department.
My toilet's on fire.
Yeah, well, the crazy thing is, in some instances, if it's an older area, it'll literally look like a forest fire. You pump in the smoke, and all of a sudden it just starts coming up from all throughout. It'll start coming out of the ground because there's broken laterals, and it'll just start popping up through the grass, and people get really excited at that point if you haven't warned them what's going on. But what we are projecting is, if we all work together and we have our technical working group that includes Peter and others from your staff having that conversation, we can save about $120 million for our ratepayers by all working together. So that's the big challenge that we see coming down the road. And even with that, we are still anticipating having to construct additional capacity to treat it. And we just acknowledge there will be some degree of rainwater and groundwater that we will have to treat.
And is addressing, like if you can identify a certain area and it's really bad here, is addressing it mean putting in new pipes, replacing old pipes with new pipes, or is it, I mean, I know here in Milwaukee we did, in my neighborhood, we did, the city did like a relining of a pipe. Is that effective?
What we're actually doing, for the last 9 months, and we're nearly to the end of our cycle, we installed monitors at various points all throughout our system to try and identify where, if there were peak flows, if there was it was a general surge, seemed consistent, like a leaky pipe across a certain range, or if there were spikes at certain points, which means there's probably a cross connection or a break. Many sewer lines, particularly the larger interceptors, tend to follow the lowest path of gravity. So do streams. So you will often see large sewer pipes right next to streams, which then rise in the winter, and you could, in theory, have, they're underwater, and are there holes? Are there just points at which the stream is flowing right into an interceptor? So part of the challenge is it's going to take a while to identify everything, and it's going to be a decade or more of work to try and identify. Some will be replacing pipes, some will be slipstreaming them, putting a new lining on the interior, some will be finding those cross connections and taking them out. Some might include partnering with a program to pay individual property owners to replace or upgrade their lateral, or remove trees that are planted right on top of laterals that are causing consistent.
And so where
all sorts of exciting things.
Where that's the most bang for the buck, I gather, is where the house sits a long way from where the lateral is long, and not like, right, if you've got a 20-foot setback and it's just 20 feet or whatever, right? So
yeah, the big bang for the buck is typically older homes. Older laterals tend to wear out. Right around now, any house that hasn't had a lateral replaced that was built in the 70s or earlier is almost certainly has a problem. A lot of, particularly the older homes, back from the 40s to the 70s, it was a deliberate, gain that you would be able to connect your rain spouts into the sewer system, because they didn't want you flooding your neighbor's property. So that was the plan for quite a while.
Right.
And finding those connections is always...
That's back when the federal government was paying to build sewage treatment plants.
Yeah, and then everyone said, hey, we'll just build treatment capacity. That's cheaper. We'll just do that. It's not anymore, that's for sure. With that excitement, I just wanted to say thank you very much for allowing us to share with you this evening. Thank you for the great questions, and we look forward to continuing to partner with you and helping keep our communities safe, healthy, and green.
Thank you.
Great.
Good
Thanks,
presentation. All right, with that, we are adjourned from the work session, and we will be back for the regular session at 6 o'clock.